In 1973, one of the most iconic horror movies would be released, William Friedkin's The Exorcist. Only 2 years prior to the movie, the book the film is based upon would be released under the same name. What you may not know is that the author, William Peter Blatty, would be inspired by a true story, the story of Roland Doe. Our story starts in 1935 with the birth of Roland Doe in a town called Cottage City, a town that borders the town of Mount Rainier and is a suburb of Washington, D.C. Roland was born into a German Lutheran family, a detail that would play some importance later in the story. In 1949, Roland was a young teen who was the type to prefer board games over sports, and due to the fact that he was an only child, he would often rely on his family for entertainment. One of these people would be his Aunt Harriet. Harriet would subscribe to the practice of spiritualism. Spiritualism was a social religious movement that was popular in the 1800s through the 1900s. In its simplest form, it was a belief that spirits could be contacted after death, typically through mediums. Due to Roland's love for board games and his Aunt Harriet's association with spiritualism, she would introduce him to a Ouija board. The Ouija board would pique Roland's interests and become something he was quite fond of. This simple interest would transform the life of everybody involved. As it does in some of your favorite horror movies, the paranormal activity would begin with unidentified and strange sounds. One night, Roland's parents would decide to go out, leaving Roland at home with his grandmother. While being the only two home, they would hear a dripping sound. A dripping sound is as ordinary as any other sound one might hear within their house. The pair would go from room to room, searching for the water, eventually completing their search in the grandmother's bedroom. The dripping sound was coming from the ceiling, and upon investigating, they would notice that a picture of Christ on his grandmother's wall would start to shake as if it was being banged on from the other side of the wall. Both the drip and the shaking of the painting would cease once Roland's parents would arrive home. However, this would only lead to the second sound that the whole family would hear, a scratching noise coming from the same bedroom. The family would again investigate and determine that the sound was coming from underneath the floorboards of the bed. The family would, although shaken, agree that this sound must have been perpetrated by a rodent of some kind, and after a short while the sound would stop, leading the family to go to bed. It was at 7 o'clock the next night that the noise would start again, leaving Roland's father to call an exterminator. The exterminator would make a visit in which he would pull up a floorboard to check for signs of rodents. After finding none, he would leave some rat poison as a precaution. This, however, would not stop the incessant sound. The scratching would continue for the next few nights, starting around 7 o'clock at night and ending at midnight. Sometime during this ordeal, Roland's mother would theorize that the sounds that the family was hearing was somehow related to Aunt Harriet's attempts to speak with the dead. Almost 2 weeks after the scratching sounds would start, on January 26th, Aunt Harriet would die. With her death, the scratching sounds would stop. However, her death would leave Roland devastated, and so it would inspire him to use the Ouija board more and more. This, as it seems, would be a vital mistake. After the scratching sound would cease, Roland would discover a noise of his own. Every night as he tried to sleep, he would be harassed with the sounds of what he would describe to be squeaking shoes, walking up and down his bed. It would take 6 nights before his mother and grandmother would join him on his bed, in which they would also hear the same sound. After laying in the bed for some time and reaching a point of fear and aggravation, Roland's mother would ask, "Is this you, Aunt Harriet?" No response would follow. "If it is you, knock 3 times. A wave of pressure would strike through the trio and knock into the floor 3 times. Immediately after, they heard and felt what they would ascertain to be a claw scratching deep within the mattress they laid upon, followed by a progressive shaking of the mattress. After jumping from the bed, the trio would witness the bed's movement cease, only for the scratching to continue, something that would be persistent for the next 3 weeks. It would not stop there, and it would not stop in the house. Roland, while in school, would experience his desk moving on its own, jetting itself into the aisle. At home, he would experience other objects flying across the room, such as a Bible and a jacket. The family would attempt to proceed as normal, however the incidents would start to become more extreme, such as the case in which, while surrounded by family members, including his aunt and uncle, Roland's chair would lift underneath him and throw him out. While his father and uncle would investigate the chair and determine that what had happened was impossible, a vase would lift itself up from another corner of the room and propel itself into a wall where it would shatter. Roland's family would begin to confront the fact that something was happening and that ignoring it wouldn't help. One of their first crutches was to assume that Roland was somehow faking the occurrences that had been happening. Roland would always plead his innocence to these claims. The incidents at school would also increase and would lead Roland to stop attending class. His parents would desperately try to solve the problem from within their house. It is at this point in Roland's story that his parents realized that they were all in over their head and decided to reach out to a litany of people: a physician, a psychiatrist, a psychic, and a minister. The physician's findings are unknown. The psychiatrist deemed Roland to be normal. The psychic implied that the situation would play itself out. However, the Lutheran minister would have a completely different view than all the others. Luther Miles Schultz of the Trinity Lutheran Church would listen to their story and come to their house multiple times. During these visits, he would observe all the phenomenon that the family claimed to be happening. Schultz would secretly hold the theory that Roland was doing all these things by himself. Clever pranks, he thought. This feeling would not dissuade him from attempting to help the family, as he could see the way it was truly affecting them, regardless of its spiritual validity. While the family lived in a suburb of Washington, D.C., their community was small, quaint, and close. These factors would lead to rumors spreading about the happenings within what the townspeople would call the haunted house. These rumors would only serve to affect the family more negatively. Not only did the rumors start, but the strange occurrences inside the house would lead the family to have no doubt that Roland had no part in the occurrences, as one night when the family was sleeping, they would awaken to Roland screaming. The parents would rush into his room to check on him, only for a large, heavy dresser to fly across the room and crash against the door they had just entered from, a feat that could not be faked. Along with the more dramatic physical phenomenon, they would also notice that Roland would start to change himself. He began to become more isolated and snappy. They would overhear him cursing obscenities at them while he was sleeping. All of these things were extremely unlike him. It was at this point that Roland's parents would become convinced that their son had been possessed. Schultz, when confronted with their opinion, would urge the parents to take Roland to a psychiatrist. As a Lutheran minister, he was unable to help in a possession. Exorcisms had been removed from their faith when Martin Luther had made the split from Catholicism. Schultz would remain with his faith and pray with the boy and his family in their own home, his home, and the church itself. It was also around this time that Schultz would decide to have Roland stay the night with him at his home. The pair would sleep in different beds within the same bedroom. During the night, Schultz would experience Roland's bed shaking, the chair shaking, and he would also see the boy sliding on the ground out of his control and injuring himself on the bed springs of the bed. This incident would change his view of the matter. A new development would begin to happen to Roland at this point. Shallow cat-like scratches would start to appear upon his body, sometimes appearing to write letters. It was at this point that Schultz realized that he was in over his head and would concede to the family that they would have to pursue a Catholic priest. Under great distress, Roland's father would decide to meet with a Catholic priest a few days later. He would speak to Father E. Albert Hughes, a meeting that was unusual due to the divide in their faiths. Roland's father would have a conversation with Hughes in which he would describe the events that were taking place within their house. Hughes, who was a young and brash priest, would prescribe a bottle of holy water to douse the bedroom in and bless candles to burn when the occurrences would start to happen. Hughes would receive a call from Roland's mother the next morning in which she told him the holy water was smashed against the wall and the candles nearly burnt the ceiling. She was told to try again, and Hughes was immediately called back after Roland's mother told him that their telephone table had broken by itself. Hughes would then take a trip to the household in which he would encounter something that would warp his brain. Hughes, upon meeting with Roland, would witness him speaking Latin, a language that Roland did not know how to speak. Hughes claimed that Roland said, "O priest of Christ, you know that I am the devil. Why do you keep bothering me?" in fluent Latin. It was at this moment that Hughes knew that there would need to be an exorcism. Hughes would reach out to his superior, Patrick A. O'Boyle. O'Boyle would overlook some of the core requirements of someone who should be performing an exorcism, and grant Hughes the role. The exorcism would take place in Georgetown Hospital, a Catholic hospital. The exorcism was held in secret, and records were not to be kept. Roland would be strapped down to his hospital bed, and Hughes would begin the ritual. He would begin the ritual by dousing the room in holy water. He would kneel at the side of the bed and begin reciting the Litany of Saints. However, before he could begin the exorcism prayers, he would be interrupted when Roland would slash his arm with a bed spring he was able to discreetly grab. Hughes would require over 100 stitches, ending the exorcism. Hughes would not be seen for a while after this incident. However, when he did turn up, he was visibly withdrawn, still bearing the scars of his wound. This failed exorcism only made things worse. The rumors would turn into shunning of the family, and Roland's condition would worsen. Roland's parents would begin debating a move to St. Louis, as they did have family there. However, this decision was made for them when the word Louis would appear cut from within Roland's skin. After moving in with their family, a Catholic family, in St. Louis, they would settle in. However, it only took to the first night when the occurrences would start happening there. With their family's guidance, they would once again reach out to religious help, in which they would speak to Father Raymond J. Bishop. Bishop would visit them, in which he would start his own investigation, one that was more regulated and thought through than the last investigation that had taken place back in Maryland. Bishop would meet with the parents, doing a careful interview of what had been happening, which was a soothing approach as Roland's parents were very weary of what could happen after their last encounter. Bishop was indeed different than Hughes. He was more accomplished and had a stronger backing behind him. The bishop would go to each room in the house and bless them individually, a practice known to combat infestation. which is the first stage of diabolic activity. Infestation, which could be observed by the strange sounds that would occur, is seen as demons stalking Roland's surroundings. However, in Roland's case, it seems that the demons had already moved on to the next stage of possession, obsession. Obsession is where the demons would influence a conscious person, without taking full control of their body. An example of this would be the scratches on Roland's body. The next stage is possession, defined as when the demon has full control of the possessed body, acting as if they are his own soul. It was during Bishop's first visit that he would witness firsthand the hauntings. After Roland was put to bed, and while the family would talk with Bishop, they would hear screaming from Roland's upstairs bedroom. After they all rushed in, they would witness Roland's bed shaking, along with scratches from underneath his skin. This visit would lead to the next exorcism. This exorcism would take place in the St. Louis home, and would be conducted by William S. Bowerden, Walter Halloran, and Bishop. The three clergymen, along with Roland's mother and his uncle, would kneel at the side of the bed to begin the ritual. They would begin in prayer, and then proceed with the litany of saints. During the prayers, Roland's mattress began to move, shocking Bowerden. They would resume the litany, summoning the saints listed within. More prayers would continue through the ritual. The ritual itself would go on all night until the morning. The family would stay up praying and reciting rituals, as Roland would suffer from nightmares, scratches, and symbols appearing on his body all throughout the night. The exorcism would last until nearly 5 a.m. the next day, unfinished. This failed exorcism would cause the trio to return not once, but twice more, achieving the same end with the second night. However, on the third night, the trio believed that they had completed the ritual successfully. Roland would mimic vomiting and then declare that he is going, there he goes. He told the crowd that he had seen a figure on a black cloud, in which the ritual had sent away. Roland was smiling happily as he waved his goodbyes to the trio as they left in the early morning. However, just 2 hours later, the trio would be rung by phone by Roland, who could only utter, "He's coming back." The trio would come back to the house that night and begin the exorcism again, only stopping once Roland would fall back into a deep sleep. Saturday, the exorcisms would begin again. Going in this time, Bowerden realized that the demon had thought of him as the prize. This was not something that Bowerden feared. On the other hand, he did fear that Roland would have to suffer because of this. He came to the conclusion that while the exorcism would torture them both, good would prevail. The exorcism would begin, and just as all the other ones before, it was also unsuccessful. They would try again the next day, starting at 8 p.m., and again it would be futile. The family and the trio would decide the next day to move Roland into a hospital, at least for the night, so his family could have a night's worth of sleep. The hospital of choice again was a religious hospital, the Alexian Brothers Hospital. Roland would be held in a mental ward where he was able to be strapped into a bed. It was this night that they would resume the exorcism. However, when beginning the ritual, nothing would happen. Roland would open his eyes in fear, scanning the room he was locked in, horrified. This was the first time that Roland was able to be exorcised without outbursts. He would fall asleep peacefully and the entire family would finally get some sleep. The peace wouldn't last for too long, however, as when he was brought back home the next day, the bed would begin shaking again. Bowerden decided that the best course of action moving forward would be to convert Roland to Catholicism. His father would give permission, and the two would start to learn about the faith from Bowerden himself, arming themselves for another exorcism. The next exorcism would take place with a new face, Father William A. Van Roo. The four clergymen, as well as Roland's father, would join Roland around his bed for the ritual to start. Again and again, the ritual was attempted night by night. Halloran would sustain a broken nose from Roland, and Roland would fight and scream despicable things. These brutal nights would persist until one night an exorcism was seemingly a success, and everything would change. Roland was now able to sleep through the night, and his family had believed him to be cured. Over the next month, the family would return to their home in Maryland, only for the outbursts to start again. Again, nightly exorcisms would begin, and Bowder would convince the family to return to St. Louis, where they would hold Roland again at the Alexian Brothers Hospital, a place where he could be restrained and monitored. This is where the story would start to see an ending. During one of Roland's daily outbursts, the demon would reveal his hand. It was early morning on Easter Sunday when Roland would be almost fully overtaken by the demon. The demon would refuse to let him attend Mass. Upon hearing of this, Bowden would go straight to Roland, witnessing him fight with the staff. The next day, the violence would continue. Roland would throw holy water at the staff, spit in the face of the chaplain, and fight more and more. During the fighting, Roland would find the strength to receive his Holy Communion. The staff felt a great relief. However, a voice would come from Roland, and it was not the voice of himself. That voice would say, "That isn't enough. He has to say one word. One big word. He will never say it. He will never say that word. I am always in him. I may not always have that much power, but I am in him. He will never say that word." Multiple other exorcisms would continue to take place. However, it would all change on April 18th. This is the date that Roland would experience his last exorcism. The demon within him was in full control. Roland was described as murderous. Bowdern would take a different approach this time, instructing the demon to speak in English. He knew that if the demon made Roland say a certain unknown word, the boy would be freed. For the first time, a new voice would bellow from within Roland. This voice was not the demon. This voice was triumphant and strong. It would decree, "Satan, Satan, I am Saint Michael, and I command you, Satan, and the other evil spirits to leave this body in the name of Dominos now." Dominos was the word that would free Roland. It would make Roland scream and twist on the bed for nearly 10 minutes, and at the end of it he would claim it was gone, and this time it really was. Roland had no memory of what had happened. Roland would leave the hospital later that day, and the room in which the exorcism had taken place would be locked and sealed off for the future. All of the clergymen would vow themselves to secrecy, barring Schultz, the original minister they had met with. Schultz would go on to tell the story, barring Roland's real name. The story would continue to spread, peaking when the Washington Post would post a detailed story of the incident, an article that the author William Blatty would use to inspire his book, The Exorcist. In 1978, construction would begin at the Alexson Brothers Hospital, and during the construction, the exorcism room was found and opened. In the preserved room, they would find something, Bishop's diary. The diary would contain a lot of the information we now know. This story should be taken as a warning. Be careful whenever you are in possession of a Ouija board, for you might be the one to be possessed. If you enjoyed this video, make sure you like, comment, and subscribe.